At the heart of Manila's busiest streets, where jeepneys roared and vendors called out from every corner, lived a 12-year-old boy named Calix, a child whose voice was known only to a few neighbors and the small church where he practiced. He wasn't famous, not even close, yet anyone who listened to him sing felt something shift inside them, the way a quiet breeze changes the direction of smoke. He had a softness to him, a gentleness that didn't match the hard edges of the world he grew up in. Every morning before school, Calix would help his mother set up a small table by the sidewalk where she sold boiled corn to passers-by. He rarely complained, even when the Manila heat pressed on his back, or the dust stung his eyes. He understood why they fought so hard. His father had passed away 3 years earlier, and since then, his mother worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. He had grown up faster than most kids his age, but he carried that weight quietly, refusing to let it darken the way he saw life. Calix had one dream, just one: to sing on a real stage, one with lights so bright they blurred out the crowd. Not because he wanted to be famous, but because singing made him feel closer to the father he lost. His dad used to lift him onto his shoulders during church choirs and whisper, "Sing like you're talking to God." And he did every time. Every note, every word. When the Manila Star Talent competition announced open auditions, Calix almost didn't join. He had no fancy clothes, no vocal coach, and no money for transportation across the city. But his mother insisted. "Your father would want you to try," she said softly, smoothing his hair with a tired hand. She didn't have the money for the ride either, so she sold extra corn that week, stretching her hours into the night. The morning of the audition, Calix woke before sunrise. The streets were still sleepy, the air cooler than usual. He held in his hands a worn rosary, his father's last gift, and tucked it into his pocket as he stepped onto a crowded jeepney. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew why he was going. When he arrived at the venue, the line wrapped around the building. Kids his age and older stood with their parents, stylists, and coaches. Everyone seemed bigger than him, bigger dreams, bigger confidence, bigger voices. He felt small, almost invisible, but he stayed in line anyway. As the hours passed, he met an older woman waiting for her granddaughter. She noticed his nervous hands and trembling breath. "You sing from your heart," she told him, "and the world will hear you." He didn't know why her words mattered so much, but they gave him the courage to keep standing. Inside the audition hall, the judges sat behind a long table, their expressions unreadable. Cameras rolled. The crowd buzzed. When Calix stepped onto the stage, he felt something twist inside him, a mixture of fear and longing. One judge leaned forward and asked, "What are you singing today, sweetheart?" Calix's voice wavered as he answered, "A song for God and for my dad." There was a small silence, the kind that makes you feel exposed yet honest. Then the music began, soft piano, gentle and fragile. Calix closed his eyes. The world disappeared. His first note cracked. He panicked. His breath hitched. For a moment, he thought he'd ruined everything. But then he remembered his father's words. "Sing like you're talking to God." This time, when he opened his mouth, something changed. His voice wasn't the loudest or the most polished, but it carried a purity that felt like a prayer wrapped in melody. Every word trembled with sincerity, every note touched with longing. The audience leaned in, stunned by the raw emotion pouring out of someone so young. Midway through the song, something unexpected happened. In the front row, a man, one of the stage crew, began to cry silently. No one knew why, no one asked. But Calix saw him. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Calix realized that maybe his voice wasn't just his. Maybe it belonged to everyone who had ever lost something, everyone who carried, hurt quietly, everyone who prayed for strength and hoped someone was listening. As he reached the final verse, his voice softened into a whisper. It was a simple line, but it felt like a bridge between earth and sky. "If I lose my way, hold me again." A hush fell over the room. And then, unexpectedly, one of the judges, known for being the harshest, the one who shredded dreams with a single word, covered her mouth. With her hand as tears slipped down her cheeks. She tried to hide them, but she couldn't. When the music ended, the room remained silent for a long moment. Nobody clapped, nobody moved. They were too stunned, too fragile from what they felt. Then the oldest judge finally spoke, his voice shaking. "I have heard thousands of voices in my career," he said, "but very few that make me believe in something bigger than myself. You did that." For the first time all day, Calix smiled, but the moment didn't end there. One of the crew members walked onto the stage, the same man who had been crying earlier. He whispered something to the judges. They nodded. Then he turned to Calix and said, "Your song, it reminded me of my own son. He passed away last year. I thought I'd never feel close to him again. But you gave me something back. Thank you." Calix didn't know what to say. He only stepped forward and hugged the man, a quiet, spontaneous act of compassion that softened every heart in the room. The audience rose to their feet. The judges followed. The entire hall erupted into a standing ovation. That was the moment everything changed. News outlets later called it Manila's Miracle Performance. Clips went viral across the USA. Viewers wrote comments about how his voice healed wounds they never talked about, how his kindness reminded them of their own children, how his courage reflected the resilience of the human spirit. But for Calix, none of that mattered as much as what happened after the show. When he walked backstage, he found his mother waiting. She was crying, not out of shock, but out of pride. She held him so tightly he could barely breathe. "You did it," she whispered into his hair. "Your dad heard you," and Calix believed that. He didn't win the competition, not in the traditional sense. Another contestant took home the trophy, but it didn't matter, because the moment Calix stepped off that stage, talent agencies reached out. Schools offered scholarships. International choirs wanted him. Opportunities bloomed like lanterns in the sky. Most importantly, he used every chance he got to help others, visiting children's hospitals, singing in shelters, performing at community events. He understood something many adults forget, that the greatest gift isn't applause, but the chance to lift someone else when they can't lift themselves. His story spread far beyond Manila, touching people who had never even heard of jeepneys or the bustle of Quiapo Market, because his message was simple, universal, and deeply human. Even the smallest voice can heal, inspire, and remind us of the goodness we too often forget. And that message carried across oceans. Years later, audiences in the USA still share clips of the little Filipino boy whose last song to God made an entire panel of judges cry. They call him a miracle, but if you ask Calix what he thinks, he'll say something different. "I'm just a boy who tried to make someone feel less alone, and in a world full of noise, sometimes that's the greatest miracle of all."